Is it possible to be progressive and traditional at the same time? What do we lose when we abandon the wisdom of the past? Is it dangerous to confuse cultural customs with universal morality? And if so, how can we determine which traditions carry genuine value and which don't? All of that and more in today's video. What is the value of tradition? Is it a chain that binds us to the past, or a lifeline that connects us to something greater than ourselves? As mentioned in my previous video on progress, modern Western discourse often portrays tradition and progress as mortal enemies, exalting progress as liberation from the dead hand of the past, while disparaging tradition as a stubborn refusal to move forward. Yet, no matter our political leanings, tradition molds every facet of our life. We inherit languages we did not invent, customs we did not choose, and values we did not create. Traditions shape us before we are even aware of them. If tradition is so pervasive, therefore, is it better to trust tradition and build upon the foundations of what came before, or should we cut ourselves free and try to chart our own path? To address this question, it helps to first analyze what tradition itself is. The historian Edmund Burke described tradition as a kind of social contract between the living, dead, and yet to be conceived, preserving society for the sake of all by imparting lessons learned through generations of trial and error. The customs we inherit aren't arbitrary, but rather are the organic accumulation of centuries of wisdom. The philosopher G.K. Chesterton characterized tradition similarly, calling tradition the democracy of the dead. For Chesterton, tradition gives our ancestors a vote, allowing them to speak into our present moment, so that common wisdom can counterbalance the expertise, and sometimes hubris, of modern experts. Why does common wisdom matter? The philosopher Michael Polanyi argues that much of what we know, believe, and do is tacitly acquired. Knowledge isn't something we always explain in theories or rational systems, but rather is often absorbed through the practices, communities, and traditions we interact with. A child, for example, doesn't learn language from a grammar textbook, but rather by immersing herself in the sounds and rhythms of a living tongue. Tradition, therefore, is the vessel by which tacit knowledge is imbued within us. It is the living inheritance of wisdom, indispensable to who we are and how we understand the world. If tradition imbues us with knowledge we wouldn't otherwise have, why do so many dispute the value of tradition? For some, rather than being a foundation to build upon, tradition is a restraint that prevents us from exploring new frontiers. According to the philosopher Descartes, traditions are nothing more than the unexamined opinions of those who came before us. Certainty, he believed, must rest upon the firm foundation of reason alone. The passage of time alone cannot make a false idea more veritable. Comparing society to a city, Descartes argues that an engineer who builds a city from scratch will produce a more rational and orderly design than an architect who tries to fit new streets awkwardly into the winding paths of the old. In like manner, tradition is not a vessel of wisdom per se, but rather is a jumble of accidents, prejudices, and contradictions that we justify simply as a matter of habit. To achieve real progress, then, we must tear down inherited structures and rebuild only what reason can justify. While Descartes' vision of a world rebuilt solely on reason is seductive in its clarity, it risks ignoring the fragile scaffolding that human social life actually depends on. Radical reform, the historian Burke warns, dismantles institutions and traditions without considering the transgenerational repository of prudence that led to their establishment, throwing the proverbial baby out with the bathwater. while modern science may discover truths that past generations never knew, to approach traditions with a reductive or dismissive mindset risks dismantling safeguards against social harm, unleashing consequences our ancestors understood, but our contemporaries overlooked, because we took for granted the order and stability those traditions conferred upon us. The danger of discarding tradition extends beyond social disorder. As Roger Scruton emphasizes, traditions are not merely functional or prudential, they are also the vessels of shared meaning and moral life. Traditions are the practices, institutions, and ways of being that cultivate virtue and give our lives a sense of purpose. To sweep them away in the name of abstract rationality is not only to risk chaos, but to erode the moral and emotional fabric that binds people together. While reform driven by reason is good, it must respect the accumulated wisdom embedded in our inherited ways of living that nourish human flourishing. If it is important to respect tradition, how then do we pursue progress and reform without tearing apart the moral and social fabric that traditions sustain? The answer, according to thinkers like Alasdair MacIntyre and G.K. Chesterton, lies in understanding tradition not as a static relic of the past, but as a living, evolving framework. If tradition is a social contract between generations, then it is not merely a collection of inherited practices, but an ongoing conversation that reevaluates the application of core principles when debating ethical dilemmas and in confronting the incorporation of new knowledge, all while remaining anchored to the key beliefs that give traditional practices coherence and purpose. Every act of reinterpretation or adaptation is a creative negotiation with those who came before, carefully discerning how to apply past wisdom to the new and ever-changing circumstances of modernity. Rather than being enemies, tradition and progress complement each other, keeping tradition relevant to modernity while tethering reform to core moral principles. Tradition, in other words, can, and often should, be dynamic, resilient, and ethically generative. Progress does not require rebellion against the past, but rather benefits from attentiveness to it. The task of a society seeking meaningful reform is not to break with tradition entirely, but let it guide change in ways that preserve wisdom and moral continuity. How do we determine which principles behind tradition are essential and worth preserving as we seek to adapt? After all, since customs, no matter how deeply ingrained, may reflect historical contingencies, power imbalances, or moral blind spots rather than true universal principles, even living traditions are not immune to error. As Descartes points out, just because a practice has endured for generations does not mean it embodies universal truth. This is where thinkers like Thomas Aquinas and Roger Scruton offer crucial guidance. Aquinas reminds us that human customs are mutable. While natural law reflects universal aspects of human nature, social and cultural traditions can and should change when they fail to serve justice or human flourishing. Tradition, when rightly oriented, should convey the truths of natural law within the context of subjective customs. Those who inherit traditions should be careful not to confuse the customs inherited with the objective truths those customs were intended to convey. Scruton similarly cautions against abstract schemes that treat all inherited customs as either sacred or dispensable, emphasizing the need to preserve wisdom while remaining vigilant against overgeneralizing moral authority. Our moral task when reevaluating tradition and pursuing reform is not simply to follow tradition or reject it wholesale, but to discern carefully which aspects of it are rightly guiding us in accord with natural law, and which are contingent, limited, or potentially harmful. We should appreciate the value of subjective customs that help teach us objective truths, but we should avoid overgeneralizing those customs such that we burden and marginalize others for failing to adhere to expectations that aren't demanded by ethics or natural law. What then should we take from tradition? In short, we should embrace tradition and reform as complementary partners in shaping a better society. Our familiarity with the past should never prevent us from challenging injustices or seeking to correct systemic wrongs. However, our hunger for change should never sever us from the wisdom that has been passed down to us by our ancestors. Tradition should guide our innovations, offering grounding and perspective as we navigate complex social, moral, and cultural dilemmas. A truly progressive society is not one that discards the past, but one that listens to it, adapts it, and fights to realize its principles more effectively, day by day. To move boldly into the future, therefore, we must synthesize our wisdom of the past, our knowledge of the present, and our dreams for the future. What do you think? Is tradition crucial for a well-functioning society? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when new videos are released. Also be sure to like this video so that YouTube recommends it to others. If you would like to support this channel for as little as $1 a month, you can also become a supporter on Patreon. Links in the description of this video. The future is shaped by how we choose to carry the past forward into the present. No matter what you ultimately choose to believe about the traditions you've inherited, continue the intergenerational conversation you've inherited with care. Every thoughtful contribution you make to this cultural discourse is a small step towards a society that honors both wisdom and justice. I look forward to navigating this path with you. Peace be with you. This has been The Philosopher.